Hello class, this is a video tutorial on decimal division. So there are two scenarios to consider when evaluating decimal division. The first one is if we have a decimal in the dividend, which is the first number in a division. So that's the first scenario. And the second scenario is if you have a decimal divisor, regardless of whether or not the first number is a decimal as well. Let's take a look at this first scenario. As you can see, if you were to read this is actually the exact same method for when we do a decimal multiplication, except for step 2, when it says to evaluate normally, instead of a multiplication, it will be a division. So I'll demonstrate this scenario first. So for this, I want to make this into a whole number. So we need to multiply this by 100 to move that decimal place 2 spots. This gives me 24 divided by 2. That's rather simple because 24 divided by 2, half of 24 is 12. But since I've multiplied by 100 here in the beginning, we need to divide this by 100 as well. So this gives us 0.12. So notice how in this example, I'll emphasize again that the dividend, the top number or the first number, is the only one that is a decimal. Okay, so let's do this one again with the second example. We want to make this into a whole number first, timesing by 10. This becomes 35 divided 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. But since I've multiplied by 10 in the beginning, I need to divide by 10 at the end. So moving the decimal place 1 spot to the left, this gives us 0.7. Now, as I've shown here, alternatively, you can just use long division. So I'll demonstrate that in this last example. So it'll be 4 into 0.08. And then we just do long division as we normally would. 4 into 0, well, that's just going to be 0. Copy the decimal. 4 into the next 0 is 0. And then 4 into 8, so how many 4s go into 8? Well, that would be 2. Well, the answer to this then would just be 0.02. So as you can see, if only the dividend, so the first number, is a decimal, we can think of this as we would a decimal multiplication, but with a division, or we can just use long division here. Now the second scenario, to evaluate these, well, notice how in these ones, the divisor is now a decimal. So in order to evaluate these, we multiply all the numbers by the largest magnitude of 10 until the divisor is an integer. So we want this to be a whole number, and then we evaluate as we normally would. Let's demonstrate this one. Notice how these numbers are rather similar, but watch very carefully how this now is different to the first one. In order to make this a whole number, we need to multiply this one by 10. But in order to make, because we've multiplied this by 10, we multiply this by 10 as well. So this becomes 240 divided by 2. That's rather straightforward now. 240 divided by 2 gives me 120. Notice how with this method, in this scenario, we don't need to reverse anything. This is the final answer. So let's demonstrate again for the second one. we want to make this into a whole number, so we need to multiply this by 10. But since, by this method, since we're multiplying this by 10 so that it becomes a whole number, we multiply all the numbers by the same number there. So we multiply this by 10 as well. This becomes 3.5 divided by 5. Now for this, you can treat this as you would here. Notice how it's actually the exact same thing now. So this just becomes 0.7. But notice the difference. In this one, we've multiplied only 3.5 for it to become a whole number. And then we reverse that times 10 by dividing by 10 at the end. Whereas in this example, we only multiply this by 10 as well as this one by 10, but there is no reversing at the end. Okay, so let's do one more. Notice, in order to make this a whole number, we need to multiply this one by 100. Since I've multiplied this by 100, we multiply this one by 100 as well. Keep the divisor, or the division. The 0.04 times 100 becomes 4. Multiplying this by 100, move the decimal place 2 spots. That becomes 80. 80 divided by 4 is just 20. And that is our answer for this one. So notice how there are two main scenarios for this. One is if only the dividend, the first number, is a decimal, we can apply this method. And the second scenario is if the divisor, the second number, is a decimal, we must follow this method, regardless of whether or not the dividend, the first number, is decimal or not. Okay, so I hope that gave you an insight into decimal division. Hope to see the next example where we go through more of these examples. See you then. Best of luck.